Okay, welcome to the Reckoning with the Primal Wound podcast. Today's guest is Koko, aka the Black Adoptee. She's a therapist, truth teller, and visionary creator whose work many of you already know and love. Her passion lives at the intersection of healing, identity, and justice, where she centers adoptee voices, disrupts harmful narratives, and builds community around truth and restoration. Koko is a thought leader in adoptee mental health and liberation work, curating education, storytelling, and spaces for collective repair like Badan and Black Adoptees Meetup. Her commitment to liberation and joy makes her an essential voice in this conversation on Reckoning with the Primal Wound. When Nancy Verrier published The Primal Wound in 1993, she gave adoptees and parents a language for something most of us had only ever felt in our bodies. Her work was undeniably seminal, and my film would not exist without the path she carved. We also co-produced Reckoning with the Primal Wound together, me and Verrier. But 33 years later, the center of gravity in this conversation has shifted. The people living the theory, including Black and Brown adoptees, transracial adoptees who are clinicians, organizers, and culture makers, are the ones pushing the work forward into the mainstream. So it feels essential that the next thought leaders on relinquishment trauma are not simply talking about us, but are us, which is what my friend Florencia Laylor from La Voz del Hijo has been saying. She's the reason we have a Spanish version of the film, so shouts out to Flo in Argentina. I'll link to her blog in the show notes. In my film, Reckoning with the Primal Wound, Nancy's contribution is one chapter in a much larger story. But I want to pivot to the next chapter, the one that belongs to adoptees like Koko, who are in the trenches of community care, theory building, and healing spaces every day. My role as a filmmaker is to honor the lineage while making room at the center table for the people who carry this work now. So it is so good to have you here, Koko.
Yes, thank you. That was such a beautiful introduction, and I'm very, very happy to be here on this journey with you.
Thank you. And I know that it's December, and I want to say happy holidays to everybody. And you had an ugly sweater holiday party yesterday.
I did.
So I wanted to check in on that because you're doing a lot of virtual meetups, right?
Yeah. When I started this work, I was looking for something pretty specific. I'm like, where is the community? Where do we collectively gather in this space? And one of the things that I noticed was what was missing was a specific space for Black adoptees. And we are all over the world, and yet there was no collective space for us to really gather together and process. So that was sort of the catalyst for Badan, which is the Black African Diaspora Adoptee Network, wanting to capture not just Black Americans or African Americans, but all people who identify as Black within the diaspora. And so I thought about how can I use my clinical skills as a therapist and also just my lived experience. I mean, honestly, I typically just go in as Koko, right? Not as Koko, the therapist. Yes, I use those skills and people have access to those skills. However, I'm just you know what? We just need a space to gather. And so yesterday we did just a check-in, I would say, because as we both know, the holidays are difficult for adopted people. So many of us are either estranged, emotionally estranged, are very low contact with our adoptive families in our adulthood. That's just a fact. That's something that I've ran into so many times in the adopted community at large. And so I was like, you know what? I just want to provide a space for people to process, people to feel held, people to feel heard. And it was a beautiful thing. It was very necessary and very needed.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
You're telling me some of the people who were there and we're mutuals and
it was
I missed it, but there are more, right? You have like a community, like core people
Yes, I
kind
mean,
of show
so
up.
far I'm really quite impressed. We have thus far built a community of almost 100 Black adoptees in the Badon network. So that's
Already.
phenomenal
Yes.
because, right, and I started this, when did I start this? Oh, in October is when I started like really building. When I went to the Black Adoptee meetup, who is spearheaded by Tarsha and I believe Jasmine, she's another Black adoptee. So they were, and at the time it was Kathy, K.E. Garland, that was helping with the meetup. So
Love her.
I was, there was about 30, I say like 30 of us that went to that in Chicago. And so at one of the events, I was able to sort of soft launch Badan, get everybody signed up. Yeah. And so with that, we just started collecting people through social media. And I'm still not, I haven't fully launched it. You know, I just wanted
Yeah.
to start with the foundation, which was like building the network, right? Like, how do we get all of these people, all of this collective information together, and then we can start building out from there, having, you know, online gatherings, having in-person gatherings. And so far, like that has been, you know, really successful.
That's amazing. I'm so
Yes.
excited for
And
you.
it's so exciting too because we can, with those like about 100 Black adoptees, we can do research within that because that's enough for a small sample
Yeah, it
size.
really is. Yes.
Right. So like the nerd in me, like the the nerd in me wants to and is working with some Black psychologists that are within the network to try to get some research done, you know, on our population. So that's another reason that I felt like it was something that was so important and so needed. And I'm always just trying to give back. Like these are my people, my community.
I love that. Yes, I
Yeah.
love your energy, and that's why I was
Thank you.
so drawn to it. And what you're doing. I like many people look to you as someone giving language to experiences that were previously unnamed, especially for Black adoptees.
Yeah.
So how do you hold that responsibility while staying grounded and accountable?
I think that for me, I want to speak from my experience, right? So even though I haven't done a scientific experiment on adopted people, I'm always gathering data because I've been in this industry, if you will, for since the pandemic. So since 2021, I've built my platform and I'm literally always connecting and talking to adoptees. So I understand the responsibility that comes with being someone that's identified as a voice, being someone who has the information. And I've also done a lot of my own research. I've again talked to people, I read, I've, you know, went and got a degree so that I can further myself, you know, with the adoptee community. So I love that responsibility. I don't take it lightly. I'm here to be a helpful part of this community and not be harmful because I realize that with that responsibility comes you know, other people who may or may not take advantage, right? So I
Mm,
just try to stay centered and grounded by knowing that so many people look to me, like the messages that I get, like when people are like, oh my God, like I've never heard this, or I've never seen this articulated this way. It brings me great joy because it lets me know and reinforces my purpose in life. And I'm so happy that adopted people have helped me find my purpose.
yes, and we were kind of
Yeah.
talking about that before we started
Yeah.
recording, and I feel like very much like it's my birthright to be making the films. And
Yes.
I like using that word because we don't really have a connection to that lineage, like maybe
Mm,
a birthright that people would
yes.
have in their
Yeah.
families of origins that are kept. But if we reclaim that
Yeah.
and do the work that we know that we're here to do, because so
Yeah.
many adoptees will say, well, I'm not even supposed to be here, you know, or don't feel like
Right.
they belong anywhere.
Right. Right.
Like,
Right.
no, you do, and
Yeah.
you have a purpose, and I can't stop doing the movie. Like, I have that pull. And I feel like I see that
Yeah.
in you too. Like you really are supposed to be doing the work you're doing.
Yes, and I can't stop. And I love connecting with other people who are just as passionate about getting the word out about how adoption affects adopted people and how it resonates throughout every facet of our lives. Like, how do we experience it in childhood? How does that, reflect in our teenage years? What's happening in our adulthood?
Mhm.
And really, people like you and I that are willing to say the hard things, bring up the hard parts of adoption, right? Before the primal wound, nobody really was even thinking about the effects are the residual effects of maternal separation. Nobody, it was blank slate baby. It was, this isn't going to affect a child. And then it took an adoptive mother, right? Like not even someone who is adopted themselves, but an adoptive mother to say, hold on, like, let me take a look at this. And then people like yourself are like, you know what, let me go a little deeper with that. Like, let me, share parts of my story while also
Mhm.
showing how other adoptees are being affected by adoption.
Yes. And I mean, it still blew my mind that no one had made a documentary about it or a movie version of the Primal
Right.
Wound. I didn't want to do that, but that's my skill set and
Yeah.
had to. And it was for
Yeah.
family members that are adoptees that were also struggling with addiction. And I just had to
Yes.
try everything I could to get
Yeah.
them the information and knew they wouldn't read the book. And, the,
Right.
so
Yeah.
uh, I didn't know about the community. I think we probably entered the community around the same time, actually,
Yeah.
because I made
Yeah.
most of the film before I knew anyone that was really
Oh,
in. Yeah, I had like
interesting.
the bare bones of it with
Yeah.
some of the experts that I'd found. Um, but then I would just it landed, so like
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting the response that it had in the community, and I was
Yeah.
not prepared for because I didn't know any adoptees before then.
Yeah. I mean, and that makes a big difference,
Yeah,
like
and so
not knowing
now
any adopted people. Yeah.
adoptees are like I love them,
Mhm.
but there's a lot of challenging stuff that goes with that, and
Right.
we're all triggered like by
Right. Well, it
so
makes
much all the
sense,
time.
right? Yeah, if you
It
think about it, it
totally makes
makes
sense.
perfect sense. I love the mirror analogy. Like we're all just a mirror of each other. And so if you have people with the same exact wounding, and there's no difference between doesn't matter what we look like, where we're from, if we were adopted from another country, none of that matters, right? What matters is that we're both suffering from the adoption wound, the maternal separation. So when you have people with that same wound,
Yeah.
then you're exhibiting some of the same trauma responses, behaviors. And adopted people don't have access to resources. So maybe whereas you and I, we may have been able to tap into resources like therapy or other specific things for me like EMDR, different types of therapies, other people don't. And so we also have a lot of untreated and unhealed people in the community. And so that's something that I just had to like wake up to is like, I don't want to say like giving people more credit, but just accepting people like where they are and just with the knowledge of that we're all sort of struggling with this same wound. It just manifests itself in a different way in different people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I'm
that's
trying to,
not
yeah,
easy.
completely reframe it. So I'm trying
Yeah.
not like well, maybe it's a rebrand of compassion for myself with the
Yes.
sequel.
Yeah.
And really reframe it as it's not our faults as adoptees.
No.
It is
Yes.
the adults making decisions when
Right.
we were pre-verbal, had no say in anything,
Exactly.
and then not having the tools to mitigate the damage,
Yes.
the primal.
Exactly. Exactly. And then there's just so many other layers like on that, right? Like there's people who had decent adoptive parents, right? But even those people like still struggle with the same wound, right? So that piece doesn't always make a difference, right? Like, oh, I had good parents versus I had, not so good parents, or I had,
No.
an avenue to process this. Not everyone did. So I
Yeah.
find that there are quite a bit of challenges within the adoptee community, just like any community where the trauma is sort of the bond, right? Unfortunately.
Yeah.
As we're marginalized, right? Like we're a marginalized community, and with marginalization comes some sort of trauma. The marginalization in and of itself is a trauma,
Yes.
right? Like being these people who are not regarded, listened to, research, that makes for difficulty in relationships. Adoptees most likely have like the most difficulty in building, forming, and also maintaining relationships.
That
Yeah.
is well said. And it kind of like segues into what I wanted to talk about next, which is like more physical adoptee spaces. Um, so do you believe safety in adoptee spaces comes more from shared identity or from shared values and accountability?
Ooh, that's such a good question. So I think the shared identity is a piece of it, right? Because obviously the adopted person, we can connect inside of those identities, right? However,
Mm.
if people don't have like the same values or similar values or things that they consider important to them, then I find that it doesn't really matter
Yeah.
because I've been in communication, friendships with adopted people whom I thought, oh, just because, right, they're an adopted person, then they're going to be similar to me, have similar experiences, have similar thought processes, right? And then I'm like, whoa, that's not the case. That's not the case at all, in fact. And so, kind of like you were talking about earlier,
Mm.
is this idea of acceptance, right? This idea of acceptance and compassion, and not having these like lofty expectations for people, right? So, like managing my own expectations of people, humans, people with this wound, going from there, whether or not I can have those people like in what part of my circle.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have been thinking about that a lot. So that I
Yeah.
wanted to see if we aligned on that. And I think
Hmm.
just like focusing on, hey, just because we're both adoptees does not mean we share the same values, you know,
No, not even the least bit.
or yeah, philosophy on accountability. And
Right.
I think that's everything.
Right.
So,
Right, right. Well, and then I think so like what happens is that like again, considering the adopted person, the adoptee wound, right?
mhm.
Accountability feels like death for some people because
Ooh,
accountability means that I have to give someone the choice to accept my behavior. So what happens is that the person who needs to be held accountable, they don't want that because they know that the other person has a choice to not talk
to
to them, speak
reject
to them.
them.
Exactly. So it harkens
Yes.
back to that wound, right? That adoptee wound where it's like, I'm not going to take an accountability. I'm not going to admit these things because this person could leave me. This community could leave me if they know that I'm a human being that made a mistake, right? But I've seen this so often, like
Me too.
where adoptees really have difficulty with accountability. And I really truly believe that it really goes back to this idea of like, if someone sees me for who I am, will I be rejected? As I've already been, again, within the adoptee trauma law that we have. So
Oh my gosh, did you see Connor's Stitch
with
woman
the
that was
lady
just
who's,
going off about
yes.
like you don't want to date an
Child,
adopted?
I was like triggered because I was like, ooh, do people think this about me? Like, is this what they think about adopted people? Like, this is insane.
Insane. Like who was that? But it's the same thing. It's
Insane.
like people.
It's triggering because there's also some truth to it. Adopted people are hard to be in relationship with. And I think that it's better that we have people like adopted Connor, myself, yourself, other creators out there. Shout out to all the adoptee influencers or creators out there who are just trying to get the word out. So I loved what Dr. Connor was saying in that he was just like, hey, like there might be some truth to this, but here's the why. And the why matters, right? Because
Yeah.
like you said earlier, it's not my fault. Like I've had
Mm-hmm.
to essentially etch that into my brain. Like anytime I'm feeling a certain way or anytime something is just like not going, I'm like, you know what? None of this is my fault. None
Yeah.
of this is my fault.
Yeah. Yeah.
My responsibility is to do my best
Mm.
to try to heal this wound, right? But even for someone like me who's high functioning, who has access to mental health resources, myself included, I still struggle. I still struggle.
Wow.
I still
Wow.
struggle. Yes,
I
I
think that's
still struggle.
great for people to hear out there.
Yeah,
You've spoken about how even BIPOC-centered adoptee spaces can still like replicate hierarchy or
yeah,
proximity to whiteness.
totally.
What
Yeah.
does like real safety look like for Black adoptees and what gets in the way of it? If you want to
So
unpack.
I think, yeah, like I think that what happens is that when you have transracial adopted people, whether that be, BIPOC people, we have to know and understand that those individuals they were raised by white folks. And then
Mhm.
what do we know about white folks and systems, right? Systems of oppressions that live within family systems, right? And then you're taking, this child who is a different culture, different race. And we all know that adoption in and of itself is a conditioning, right? We are from the time we are small, we're learning about how to be conditioned to these environments that are not our environments. We were pulled into these environments.
Mhm.
And so what happens a lot of time when you have transracial adoptees is they don't know and understand that they're still under that conditioning. They've not decolonized. They've not, done the work in order to get from under, the cloak of whiteness, right? And so when you go into these spaces, you see still performance, right? Still, I can't just let loose. I can't reclaim my culture. I have to
Wow.
sort of, again, perpetuate systems of oppression and honestly like not even really understand, not even be in consciousness about that. And so for Black adoptees it's hard to go into these spaces, right? Because we don't get recognized, we're not a part of the conversation all the time. It's very especially like with same race Black adoptees, you've got this sort of sensationalism around transracial adoption, and that becomes the
Yeah.
indicator, sort of the focal point of all adoption, right? Like these stories where saviorism becomes the center, right? As opposed to with same race adoptions, again, it's a little bit different, right? It's a little bit different because you don't, not to say there's not still like saviorism in that, because there is, but it's just very different. It's a different
Mhm.
feel. So I've tried to sort of infiltrate spaces that were more so identified as or perpetuated, systems of oppression. When I go into spaces and there aren't any other Black adoptees, right? Or there's like one or two, or there's just like a handful. And then you've got all of, this other, I would say, light being shined on like same race or white adoptees. And
Mhm.
so we don't get to talk about how racism comes into play, right? How
Yeah.
racism really comes into play. Yeah.
That's why you think it's important to have Black adoptee meetup and
Yeah. So I think it's
separate.
important that's why like
Hmm.
Kathy and Tarsha started that. That's why I started Badan. That's why there's been things like the Black Adoptee Support Group that, that has been, or other Black creators that say, you know what, let me focus specific on Black adoption. I was
Yeah.
talking to Tony Hines like a few weeks ago
Oh, wow.
and love Tony to death. And
Yeah.
he's always working, in the space, doing the thing, right? And so he was telling me, like, we don't have a lot of like authority figures like that are strictly talking about Black adoption. Like it just doesn't exist. There's still a space for that because again, it's something that gets deduced to transracial adoption, and then not really understanding that there's a whole other group of people that really haven't gotten their opportunity to talk about what
Yeah.
it feels like to be Black and adopted in America or even outside of America. And how does racism, systematic oppression, and other tools of white supremacy, like how does that feed the adoption industrial complex, right? Through transracial adoption, through denying Black families the ability to even adopt, right? To discounting how kinship adoption has existence since like the beginning of time, like that was a very common practice, was for Black people to take in their own family members, their own Black people into
Oh my
these,
gosh.
families and things. And that goes all the way back to slavery, times of slavery, when so many Black people were separated and children were separated from their families. So then you had other Black families that were like, we're just going to take them in. And so that, sort of started this idea of kinship adoption. That's not like new, right? But then when you think about adoption, think about the things that keep Black people from adopting, right? Being a part of a system, being afraid that of the white gaze, of like the home studies, the things in which people just in general have to go through in order for like to do an adoption study and things like that. Your finances, your family, things that Black people have had difficulty allowing, white people in for fear of retaliation, so many different things, so many different things. And so that's why it's important to talk about where Black people fit into the adoption industrial complex, the stories, the traumas, because we don't talk about it enough.
Oh my gosh, period. Yes.
Come on,
Oh,
clock
yeah.
it.
Oh, I'm so glad that you're saying all this. It feels so important. Like I feel this energy. We're at an inflection point right now.
Yes.
It feels exciting. It feels like this is the right time to talk about this and have,
Yeah.
you be heard and listened to and like
Thank
maybe we
you.
can change something. Like I feel like
Yeah.
we can. And we can platform
Absolutely.
different people too. Like I don't
Yes.
do you want to say anything else about who gets platformed in these spaces or
Yeah.
conferences
I
and who
mean,
doesn't get platforms and like
I think first of all, mostly white adoptees get platform in these spaces. Like if you look at who are the more like popular adoptees voices, they're typically white people, and then you've got sort of these other white adjacent, and sometimes people get a little upset when I use white adjacent, because it's not me saying that just because you're not white that you are white, right? Or you're adjacent to that. However, we have to be in reality about the things that are being shared. So I personally hear so many CAD stories, right? So I hear so many Korean adoptee stories. I
um,
hear so many stories of transracial adoption, just in general, right? Because again, it's sensational, and our people love the white savior story. So they're going to highlight those stories. But there's also something so complex about being Black and adopted, especially in America. Like,
yes.
especially in America, there's something really complex. And there's a group of us who don't even know that we can speak about it. Because of culture, Black culture says you are supposed to be, loyal to your family to the end. If you speak out against your family, then, you're sort of ousted, and so there's so many cultural things that go
Yeah.
into it that really should be talked about. But there's a group of us who have, again, been conditioned, just like most adopted people, to not speak about the hard stuff. And then when we don't get the light, we don't get, the notoriety, or our stories don't get platformed the same way. It makes it seem as though we don't exist, or our stories don't exist, or our
Mhm.
issues don't exist, when they do.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think there is that pressure to be palatable in adoption spaces?
Oh my gosh, totally. Like I've said some stuff, and it's just really hard for people to digest it. And
Because
so,
you have a hot
yeah,
take that I'm
I
thinking of.
do.
I mean, you have a
Yeah,
lot of hot takes, but
I do have quite a few hot
are you
takes.
pro or against transracial adoption?
Oh, that is such a good question. And if I had to just answer it straight up, I would say I'm against it. And I'm against it because I truly don't think that enough white people who adopt are doing the amount of anti racism work to be able to adopt a Black child or any like child that's outside of their race and culture. A lot of white people who want to adopt are, your quintessential families who don't have a child, who say, like, okay, well, if I can't get a white child, then okay, this is acceptable these days. Let me go ahead and get a Black one. But then they're sticking them in completely white communities. They've never even broken bread with a Black individual. They don't have Black friends. They don't have community. And so when I see those things, and then I hear the stories from transracial adoptees who have grown up in these communities within this family system that is still racist, still oppressive, then I'm like, no, I'm not.
I know.
I don't see it. Now, there
Yeah.
are some adoptees who I feel like have reclaimed and maybe have decent relationships with their adoptive families, but honestly, I've not seen that many. I've
I
not
know. I think
seen.
they're exceptional, which means they're
Yeah.
exceptions to the
Right.
rule, the majority.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I'm
Yeah.
so glad
So
you said that because like people don't want to say that. We gotta
they
be
don't want
like
to say the
real
thing.
though.
They don't want to say the thing. And here's the thing, my perspective is also slightly different because I grew up in a predominantly white community. So although I wasn't a transracial adoption, I grew up in a white community.
Oh.
So I was one of the only Black kids in my class. I was I had all white friends for the most part. Like, yeah, all the Black people sort of like bound together, but I still grew up having to be inside of a white community. And that makes you move different. That makes you move a lot different. Now, that's been helpful to me because I feel as though I can dwell in so many different circles.
True.
I know how to be palatable, if you will, for white folks, but also that extreme living environment affected me deeply, deeply as a person who didn't see people who look like me very much growing up, except when they were in my family.
Mm.
For a person who saw a standard of beauty, right? Like even looking like myself, darker skinned, being having more traditional like Caribbean Afro features and things like that. I didn't see anybody who looked like me, not even in my family, and so I can intellectualize like what it would be like for a transracial adoptee to live within a white family because I lived in a white community where I had to be on my P's and Q's, where I had to be a chameleon and sort of fold in as best as I could and then have to deal with again like being adopted. Yeah.
Yeah. So you do, I mean, now it makes you like the perfect spokesperson for so many
Right.
experiences. But I totally hear you, and it needs to be talked about more. And
Yeah.
especially right now, I just feel like adoptees should be looked to as leaders right now in this.
Yeah.
People gotta listen to us.
Well, and people have to find value.
Yeah,
It's been hard to flip the narrative.
so hard.
It's like being up against like a brick wall and like, oh, there's a bunch of us
So,
trying to move that wall. And although as a collective we're pretty large, we're only moving it. It feels like we're only moving it like inches, right? Because I still hear crazy stuff. Like I still hear stuff
oh my gosh,
and from people, and I'd be like,
constantly.
have you not learned anything from following me for the past, six,
Oh,
7 years? I think it's a hard narrative to shift because society, right? It's not, this is like a literal ingrained like part of our fabric, right? Of America. is adoption, like this lovely, beautiful idea of what adoption really means, right? And how that affect. It was just like, it's great, it's beautiful. Like I just seen something this morning. I just saw something where a white adoptive parent was like combing their black child's hair, and there were just so many people like, oh, great, that's so amazing. And it's like every parent should comb their child's hair. Like, why are we giving
So
praise?
many dopamine hits to
Yeah,
the
that's what I'm saying. Like,
reaction.
why just for people doing, the basic for their adopted child, right? But again, because,
Yeah.
oh, the person is white, then it becomes like, oh, they're doing it because, this altruism, and, they're doing it out of like the goodness of their heart. And, oh, just these poor black babies, right? Like they just didn't have nobody to take them. And, that's the part that's really difficult, right? Not understanding what and who are creating Black adopted kids. It's the system who are creating that. It's the system of oppression within CPS, within state systems who are removing these children, not trying to go and find homes and families that are, connected to them, but saying immediately what America has done forever, which is, hey, we're going to remove this child, rebrand them, and let them be raised by white people. And it's just, I've not seen a transracial adoptee yet who has not been so affected by living in white communities, growing up with white parents who were maybe like low key racist, or family members. Like that does something to your biology.
Oh,
That does something to your
has to.
DNA.
Yeah,
It changes you. Yeah.
100%.
So it's, it was hard. Like growing up in a white community, like the white kids, they were terrible. You know what I mean? Like
I cannot
they
imagine.
were
No,
terrible.
I
Yeah. They were, so I can't even imagine not having a black home to come home
yeah.
to be able to process that. Because at least I will say, and somebody said this to me the other day, and this was a transracial adoptee. They were like, well, do you think that even like it was so much worse, like, for you, like as a black adoptee raised by a black family versus, someone who was raised like transracially, even though you sustained harm? And I'm like, no, I don't think it was worse for me because I still had black people around. You know what I'm saying? Like there are some of the,
yeah,
or even like, let's say Latin, Latin people or whatever it is your culture is. A lot of
the
these
culture. Yeah.
individuals don't have access to that until their adulthood. So then they feel weird trying to infiltrate their community, right? Because they've not been taught how to just be whatever they are, right? They've not been taught.
It's almost criminal. I feel like we
I
wouldn't
mean,
think about
it
this.
is.
It's people don't understand what how they're creating adults, people who aren't okay, and they could
Right.
be. We could all be okay.
I think we could be better than what we are.
For
You know what I
sure.
mean?
That's
Like
like what
to
I
the
want to unlock
denial.
and
Yeah,
talk
the
about.
denial
Yeah.
and the gaslight. That is so, people don't understand the idea of identity formation and how it is literally the crux of the human experience, right? And if you don't have that, you don't have anything to anchor to. So
Oh
you're
my God.
constantly
Yeah.
trying on other identities, right? You're trying to fit in. And then you have chemicals that are flooding your body and hardwiring you essentially for connections that are not really healthy, right? Connections that are not feeding your identity. In fact, they're like doing the opposite, right? Which is what's happening in adoptive families, right? Like this idea of denying the adoptee their true identity
Mm.
and then expecting them to be able to thrive, right? So people like do their best, like we did our best with that, but even still, I'm telling, grew up grew up in a Black household, had lots of stability in that way, and all those things. Again, like I said, access to mental health, things like that. And I still struggle. I still struggle with identity and imposter syndrome and so many different things that are really just attached to the adoptee experience.
Same.
Yeah.
Oh,
And I've not met any adoptee who would say different. I really would. I don't know that I would. Yeah.
I agree. Now that I've met
Yeah.
hundreds, if not
Right.
thousands of adoptees,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's what I'm
that
saying. It's like,
thread,
I'm like,
yeah,
is it just me? Like, I was like, am I
no.
just around the same type of adoptees? Like, where are the ones that like everything was wonderful? But even with those individuals, like, I feel like they're still in the fog. Like,
Well, yeah.
there's something about those experiences that don't resonate with me. Like, for example, I was watching a reel the other day, and there's this one, she's a biracial Black adoptee, adopted by a white mom and a Black dad, I think.
Oh,
And she is pretty like famous. Like, she's a ballerina.
oh, maybe I know who
I
you're talking.
forgot her name is,
Yeah.
but she often like will come out and like talk about the positive side of adoption, like how her story was just so beautiful. And the
Oh,
other day she came out and she was talking about how she met her biological mother, and like she was like, I didn't feel anything for her. Like, I just looked at her and was like, these are my parents. And then she
oh.
went on sort of a rant about like
Hmm.
blood not mattering. And it's like, you know what? I really hate when people say that. It doesn't matter to you,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't matter to you. But for many of us, it matters even when we don't want it to matter. People who have diseases, like, like diseases and things that are hereditary and passed down generational, blood's going to matter there.
Yeah.
People who perhaps like were in situations where they were dating like their biological blood is going to matter, right? So we can't just like blanket this whole lovely adoption story for every single adopted person, knowing that so many of our experiences really, really vary. And honestly, for the most part, I'm not hearing happy adoption stories. Now, I'm biased, right? Because I'm in the community, and that the assumption is that people are looking for something when they come looking for me or other like adoptee spaces to validate their experience, right? So
Right.
I understand that, there's a bias there. However, for the most part, I've not heard like this overarching idea of like the secure, happy, loved,
Well,
adopted person.
I was supposedly on a trip with one of those to Japan, like the last podcast episode, we got into that, and she doesn't believe in the primal wound. She had a
Really?
happy childhood, all this stuff. And so, like, we didn't talk about it much, but then it was such a disaster. And she was like one of the meanest people I've ever encountered. And when I said, do you think this is coming from some unprocessed trauma from adoption? Do you want to talk about that? Then she's
Yeah.
like, and
I Here's what I will say.
yeah,
Just from like a clinical standpoint, there people do have the ability to attach and bond and have healthy, fruitful relationships
of
and
course,
life as an
sure.
adopted person. However, I I'm just side-eyeing any person who is like, oh, I've everything has been great, nothing, there's no residual effects. I don't believe in the primal wound. You don't have to believe in the primal wound because research supports the primal wound. Just like research supports the idea of how maternal separation changes our biology, how maternal separation hardwires us for, avoidant attachment,
Mm.
anxious attachment, a disorganized attachment. So people can say these things, right? And that's when I like to go in my research bag and be like, well, yeah, like you
Say
could
it all you
feel
want.
that way. Yeah, like you could feel that way if you want to, but that's not really realistic to most of our experiences. Like, of course, there's going to be outliers in anything, or people who are just in denial, right? Like,
Oh, I was like, you're telling me you're
hello.
fine because you are just projecting a lot onto me.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
she was like, you don't know anything about adoption. How can you say you know anything about adoption? I was like,
That's
what?
insane, right? Maybe because I've been
I get that
adopted.
from
Like,
adoptive parents too, because I'm not an academic or an expert.
well, and I think that that's the hard part. Because like I went back and forth. Like, do I get a degree? I don't really care about my degree. Like, I think again, degrees are also rooted in systems of oppression, right? So degrees became something that people had to get in order to be believed and regarded. When there are people who have general expertise who don't ever step foot in academia, which is rooted in white supremacy and oppression.
Oh,
So
yes.
I don't ever really give so much credence to people who like have degrees. Like, yes, it's people trust me more, I guess, because I have a degree, but people trusted me before that, right? Because I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And
So the lived experience.
it's a
Like,
lived experience. To me, the lived experience is going to trump every
right?
single experience out there. That's why even with the Primal Wound, there's so much controversy, right, around
Yeah.
that book, and that book having been written by an adoptive parent, right? Because
Yeah.
there is an essence of being adoptee that other people just do not understand.
Yeah.
That is something else that I've come to accept and realize. Is like they just don't get it. They
Yeah.
just don't get it.
I
They
mean,
truly just don't get it.
and Verrier came really close to, I mean, she gets
Oh,
it. I would
totally.
say she gets it more than
Yeah, but
most,
obviously she won't understand
but
it from
still,
just the being an adopted
exactly.
person, right? Like,
Yes.
and I think that yes, like she was super observant and was able to really articulate what she was seeing, right? I mean, I don't find anything necessarily like wrong with the book. I just hear oftentimes like how adopted people are like, okay, we want to hear from other adopted
Yeah.
people, like
And
straight
that
up,
makes sense.
right? Yeah, like someone just inboxed me. I don't know who it was, and they're an adoptive parent, a transracial adoptive parent, and they were asking me if they could use some of my work in their like research and like the work that they're going to be doing for transracial adopted people. But to be honest, I was like, I don't really. I want this to come from adopted people.
Oh,
That was really my feeling, is that like it's kind of like that book White Fragility, right? It's like, you know that went on to be like a best-selling book, right? But it was still like written by a white woman, right? And that person is getting compensated for that. They're getting the
oh
notoriety
yeah.
for that. And that's kind of like what I'm always making sure is that like, okay, is this coming from like someone who's like adopted, or is this coming from someone who has an opportunity to
Mm,
take from the adoptee community in some way because they're not highlighting or trying to work with like other adopted people, like kind of like how you shifted, right?
yeah,
You're
yeah.
like, let
Let's
me like hear from the people, right? Yeah.
do
And
it.
that's
Yeah,
valid.
no, that
Yeah.
is so powerful. And I'm glad you said that. And it's hard for adoptees to set boundaries, especially
Mm,
around their work, but we really should do that
yeah.
more and like
Yeah.
step into our power. And that's something we talked about that Jenna said to me in a podcast earlier that was like, well, people see your value and they're just like, why, like, haven't you stepped into your power?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
I don't know, but that's what
Right.
I want to do, especially for the sequel. And this is a
Yeah.
perfect segue to be like, we can
Yeah.
do all of these things
All of them. Yeah.
and get into the mainstream, even though like the
Right.
first film didn't get distribution. And I've heard that like even judges like that work in the system know about the
Yeah.
movie and
Yeah.
they perceive it as being anti-adoption and so they're
Right.
anti the film. And
Right.
I didn't even know people knew about it like in that on that level. So that's
Yeah.
kind of great and
Yeah.
on one hand, but it's also it means that I don't think it's like, how do you distribute this information to the masses if you're going to get
Right.
blocked from
Well,
distribution?
and here's the thing, and this is what I believe, is that the information will go to who it needs to go to. You know what I mean? So like not necessarily worrying about that part, like just doing the thing, right?
Yeah.
And then knowing that, like, because we're talking about, again, a system. I wouldn't expect many judges to, have awareness about adoption, how that, because they're working on the side of the industrial complex, right? And
Yeah.
that
They're getting
is to,
paid.
exactly, they're getting paid to make rulings on these things, in so many different ways. So that makes perfect sense to me that people often think that anytime someone speaks up against adoption, it's anti-adoption.
Yeah.
I'm not anti-adoption per se, because I realize that, like, adoption isn't going anywhere soon. And I tend to be a really linear, logical thinker. And so when I know that, like, adoption isn't going anywhere, then I don't think on the side of abolition, because to
Mm.
me, that's not on the horizon. Hell, I'm living in California. I still can't even get my birth certificate, right? So to me, there's steps that need to be taken before abolition can even exist. And so the important part to me is, like, educating is always going to be the first
Yeah. We're still on that
tier in
level.
that. Yeah, like, we're still on that level. We're nowhere near abolition, because let's be real, the complete system, the system needs a complete overhaul.
Yeah.
If we were to really do the things that we needed and wanted to do for foster and adopted people in the system, we would abolish the whole system. But nobody in America or outside of the country is going to abolish a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's not going to happen. And
No.
it's not going to happen anytime soon. So we, as in people, adopted people, it becomes our responsibility, right? It becomes part of our community. Just like I have a responsibility to the Black community, I have a responsibility to the parenting community, I have a responsibility to the female community, right? All these different responsibilities. To me, I just take that on as another part of my responsibility. Like, you know what? I can change this little by little. If I can get one adoptive parent to take a look at this, and take a closer look at it, then I feel like I'm doing my calling, my job.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that's our shared North Star probably is getting those
Yes.
messages of like you changed
Yeah.
my life and my
Exactly.
relationship with my family.
Yes. Yes.
So again, we're gonna
Yeah.
make it no matter what. And I think you're
Yeah.
right. Words are spells, and maybe
Totally.
like it's gonna get to the mainstream. The sequel is.
It
Um,
will. And I think there's ways in which you can frame things. You know what I mean? I think that, like, I just hate the idea of anti.
I am so shocked when I
It's
hear
like
that, when people tell me
so
that they
crazy.
perceive the film that way, because it isn't. And I was not trying
Yeah.
to create that. So it's
Right.
mostly the title. But
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
well, it's not. So that's all I can
Well, and I
say.
don't think you should change it. Yeah, like, you don't, again, like,
No, no, I can't change
people,
it.
if
I
we're
like it.
thinking, like, on a spiritual level, like, that was what you wanted to call it. That's, like, what you wanted to embody about
That's
it.
what we're
And
doing.
again, yes, that's what we're doing. So if, like, if people think for some reason that's anti, that's not something that you would be able to change, because those people already don't have, like, a baseline understanding of adoption, the
Right.
residual effects of it. Like, and sometimes, and oftentimes, they don't want to understand,
That's what
because
they don't. Yeah.
if you wanted to understand, that would mean that you would have to take a look. That would mean that you would have to say, maybe adoption isn't the best option in this scenario, or maybe I need to help the families instead, right? So there becomes a morality issue
Yeah.
when you lift the veil, right?
Yes.
Because you have a group of people who are like, hello, we're being harmed, unknowingly being harmed in this situation. You guys taken this experiment, this age-old experiment, you've replicated it time and time again, and it's still not working. It's not working. I literally sat with a group of 12 to 15 people yesterday, and not one of those people are spending time with their adoptive families for Christmas. Why? Because most of us are low contact and or estranged, both physically and emotionally. That's just the reality. And if someone, I would challenge anybody to say otherwise.
I
I really
know.
would.
This is what
Yeah.
I think I was saying a similar thing, and then I mean, I don't really get invited to like the adoption agency stuff anymore because they don't want to hear that.
No, they don't want to hear
And
that. They don't, of
I'm
course
trying
they
to
don't want to hear it.
prevent that. Like we're trying to
Yeah.
prevent that outcome.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're trying to prevent it,
People
at
have
least
to,
mitigate it, right? Mitigate it as
yes,
much as possible, which it is helpful. It's immensely helpful having parents, because I have heard of like other adopted parents who were just good people, right? Like they were like just good parents, right?
yes,
Like take away the whole adoption center, like they were just cool parents, right? And those
yes,
adoptees do better,
they
right?
do.
Those adoptees attach better. Those adoptees had models, positive models of relationships that are going to be more helpful than anything else, right?
Yeah.
Is how that what that foundation looks like, and how childhood trauma, perpetuates itself later on in life. So it's like, yeah, there are decent adopted
Of course.
parents out there, you know what I mean? Like good people who, but even those people may not be in reality about what still some of the struggles that their adoptive child has.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They always can be learning more and
exactly.
talking about this
Yes,
more with, yeah. And I
absolutely.
feel like that's what we're saying. That's all we're trying
Yeah,
to get out there. Like,
we
come
just
to this
want you to open your eyes. Yeah,
open your eyes, open your heart to this
yes,
message. And
absolutely. Absolutely.
but like to wrap up, can we talk about the sequel a little bit in Fathers and like what
Yeah.
is even the paternal wound?
Ooh,
Um, but
yeah,
so like for a longer form question, I have
yeah.
in your work with Black adoptees, how does the father story or the absence of it show up later in identity, attachment, and
Yeah.
intimate relationships?
What I'll say is that, like, knowing and speaking to a lot of adopted people, Black adoptees, that there's something really interesting. I don't know how to quite articulate or put my finger on it, that many adopted people have difficult relationships with the adopted father, right? Because in so many of our stories, we have situations where you have maybe the infertile adoptive mother, right?
Mhm.
And that person becomes the symbol of adoption and the want and the need and the desire for the baby. Now, the male, in this scenario doesn't always want or need the child, right? But they do it for the adoptive mother, right? And so you have a group of people, adopted people, who grow up with this really profound fatherhood wound because they weren't able to bond with the father. In fact, I see more difficulty in adopted people bonding with the father than even with the mother, right? Because women are more naturally more nurturing, anyways, right? And we have to understand that bonding with a child that's not yours is challenging, right? That is going to
Kind of
be
goes
a challenge.
against that biology.
Exactly.
So you're fighting that
Exactly.
limit. You have to
Absolutely.
be consciously there to
Yes.
jump over that hurdle. And
Yes.
maybe most
So
fathers
I
are they?
and
Yeah.
there's another piece to it, right? Like if we're looking at patriarchy, we're looking at what it means, especially like in America, to have a seed, a child that is of your lineage, someone who has your genes and your DNA, and what a disappointment it is when your adoptive child doesn't have any of that. And so when it comes to men, patriarchy, America, and those types of things, I think it becomes even exponentially more difficult
Mm.
for those individuals, the paternal side of it, to really kind of step in there and say, you know what, something doesn't feel right about this. And then so you're thinking about the paternal wound as it pertains to the adoptive father, but also biologically, right? Like, what does that mean for your biological father? Because again, we assume that there is no real connection there, right? It's like that person is typically not considered in the equation. And so when they do kind of come back into the picture, like, What does that look like? Is there supposed to be a relationship there? Is there supposed to be a love there? We just assume that because this is a male, this is a man, this is part of, the patriarchal society, the symbol, does that person even have a right to me, to connect and things like that? So I think that relationship is almost more difficult in a lot of ways. It almost can be a lot more difficult because it's not something that like we expect. It's not something that we sometimes even as adopted people are even allowed to grieve, like our father figure. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
I don't know about you, but I didn't. I tried to push it away or like it didn't matter for most of my
Yeah.
life.
Yes.
So I like for someone realizing they've never explored their paternal wound, like
Yeah.
what would you say is a good, like grounded, compassionate place to begin thinking
Just
about that?
that this matters, right? Like that
Yeah.
this is something that I don't have to pretend doesn't exist. And like that's so relatable because I recently found like my biological father. I was like within like the last year, like I connected with like a half sister. That didn't go very well. She didn't want to have anything to do with me. And then I found out like who he was, and it was so interesting because for most of my life, even when I found my biological mother 10 years ago, I wasn't focused on finding my biological father. I
Same.
didn't even
Yeah,
think
our
I
timeline's like
cared.
very similar with that.
Yeah, like it was just something that like I really was like, I'll take it or leave it, right? But I realize how in my life in particular, how adoptees are so susceptible to the fatherhood wound, right? Like
Ah,
my adoptive father was he himself was a kind person, right? He was a good person. However, he wasn't like bonded to me, wasn't to me, in my opinion, wasn't really like bonded to my sister, sort of just like tolerated us being around, right? So wasn't really nice and warm, but wasn't like bad either. But I realized as I grew up and I heard other people's experience with their dads, I was like, wait, hold on a second. Like I was missing
yeah.
something completely. I was completely missing something in my childhood as an adopted person and having this fatherhood wound, right? And I just could never figure it out growing up. Like, why don't I feel close to this person? Why don't I feel like this person loves me? Why don't they tell me I'm beautiful? Why don't they do the things that fathers and daughters are supposed to do? And then I realized, like, oh, this is specific to perhaps adopted people. And then when I finally found my biological father, I saw that genetic mirror. I was like, wow, this does complete something for me. Whether it is a cycle, whether it is a puzzle piece, whether it is like the unknown, like it did something for me.
Yeah.
Finding that person. Now, I'm still like in the midst of all this because, the adopted life, you always are thinking, doing, trying to see what takes precedence, right? Because it's a lot of energy to find
So much to
these
process.
people,
It's
child, to be doing all this. Like people don't understand that either. Like it's a lot of mental energy to
Mhm.
open these wounds, reopen these wounds, get rejected, not get rejected, identify or define it. And so
So
I kind
hard.
of tabled it for now.
Yeah.
Like I've not reached out to him. Like I said, I was gonna do it, but I was like, I'll figure out when I'm gonna do it. You know what I'm saying?
We haven't
Because
had an
it's
initial talk.
no,
Yeah. I mean, that's a big one. That makes sense.
no. I asked
It should take as much time.
my search angel, she like I had talked to her about it like a few weeks ago, and she's like, I was like, can you just give me his information? Because she has access to like records and all that. So she was like, yeah. So she found his phone number and all this stuff. And Sandy, she was like, you need to do it because what if something happens and you're never able to do it? But then I was like, well, I tend to think of things in this realm, like in this period of my life, what's happening in my life right now. You know what I mean? Like, is it gonna change the here and now? Not really. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know who he is, and I think adopted people are always kind of up against that, right? Like,
Yeah.
where does this fit, like, in my life? I don't have any lofty expectations of him being a father. So, I just sort of have to, I don't know, I just like sitting with it for a little bit.
That's all we
Yeah.
can do. And then
Right?
we'll wake up one day and be like, this is it. Which is what happened
Yeah.
when, because I
Yes.
reached out also to my brother first, my half brother,
Okay.
and then it kind of let it be on him when he would reach out to me. And
Oh,
it was literally like he woke up one day and was like, this is the day I'm going to call Autumn.
yeah. Yeah.
So that was great. And I understood that because it's life
Yeah.
changing,
Yeah.
but that's the only way we can.
I actually like that idea. That's not
I,
a bad idea.
well,
Like
that
if
would
the other
say, do you
person
have,
wants to do it,
but
they'll
then your
do it,
sister
right?
would have to be like
Well, and she was
involved.
already, yeah, she was already like, no,
She's,
and like she was not. And
yeah,
that's another thing,
I
right?
know.
Like
So that
you think
sucks.
about that, right? You're like, this person, this is my closest, she's my closest DNA relative besides my parents, my biological parents. And I'm like, and she just does not want anything to do with me. You know what I mean? So I had to, again, be in a good space to be able to hear that, not let my whole world fall down from another rejection. You know what I'm saying?
So
Like, God
hard.
damn. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, like it's really hard because you don't know what's going to come up for you, you know, while you're doing all this work, uncovering stuff. You know, my adoption story or my biological, it's like, it's really tricky. Like, it's not, you know, there's a lot of people who could get hurt, or you know,
Yeah.
just a lot that goes into that. And so sometimes honestly, like I just don't feel like dealing with it. I just don't. You know.
Like, how could
Yeah.
Jill said to me when I wasn't thinking, I was just gonna go see Perry and that side, and she was like,
Yeah.
I really admire you for,
Yeah.
even opening this up.
Yes.
Like, and I was like, whoa, that is
Yeah.
really nice to hear.
Yeah.
Because I don't think many of us stop and realize how much it takes and how, like,
Yeah. You need courage. You need bravery. Like I don't think people realize. I can even remember finding my biological mother, and I just remember the feeling like my heart was like gonna burst out of
yeah,
me, and then looking at pictures and looking at every detail, like, do they look like me? Oh my god, they look so much like me. And you know, what do I do with this information now? Oh, she didn't want anything to do with me. Where do I put this? You know, what do I do? So it does, I think that's the importance of having like an adoptee therapist, somebody who can help you,
oh
you
yeah,
know, go through those emotions, because it's not easy. It's
it
not
is
easy.
not easy. But I'm so glad there's people like you in the space that can talk to other adoptees going through it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, which is, I mean, we can wrap up super soon. I love this interview. It's everything
When
to
I
take away.
think about the things that I want to tell adoptees, I love adoptees, by the way. This is my t-shirt. Um, I always want to say you have the right, the birthright, like you said earlier, to tell your story, right? Like
Mm.
I think like again, so often at the nucleus of the difficulty that we have as adopted people is just our throat chakra being closed, right? Not being able to just speak,
Mm.
share our story exactly the way it is. So what I always like to tell adopted people is like, you can't be abandoned as an adult, right? Like you're self sufficient,
Mhm.
like you're okay, like you're safe. So you're also safe to tell your story. And so if that results for some reason in your adopted parents, like disowning you, you know, not wanting to talk to you like people, because there are challenges with sharing your story. There are, and it takes a lot of care and compassion, and it takes a lot of bravery and courage to be able to do that. Then you know we have to reconsider how much those people should still be a part of our story. So I think just going out there, just saying what it is, and like, you know, being clear about what you want to share about your story is what I always talk to adopted people about.
Oh,
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
I
Thank
love
you.
that, Coco. Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, this feels like one conversation in a much longer arc.
Yes.
And I'm deeply appreciative for the clarity and care you bring to this moment in adoptee history. And I'm so excited about the sequel and
Me
adding your
too.
voice to Reckoning with the Paternal Wound, which will come out sometime in 2026.
Awesome.
Stay tuned for that.
Yes,
More
I
Koko.
appreciate it. Yay!
And
Awesome.
yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.